So today I have somebody with me who's probably the sharpest finance brain that I know of, or perhaps the sharpest brain in any sort of markets that I know of. So this is Karan Sampat.
Yeah, I mean, my journey into finance, rolls back to, a lot of years back. I used to hear a lot of conversations, in which my father used to have with his own clients and his friends and everyone. So that was a real starting point for me.
They feel CFA is a gateway to get into finance as a career.
Chartered accountant has finance as a subject, but CFA is totally finance. And what are the prerequisites, you're looking at to actually, involve me in that kind of a role? Okay.
I think this was basically, if I just break it down, you were really frank with your boss, and then you took this idea about writing on Shale, which was something of a big talked about topic at that point of time.
But if you actually want to become a proper hardcore research analyst, you should also build up skills.
Data is, like Mukesh Ambani said, data is the new oil.
Yeah.
But it's very relevant for oil also. Data out to a particular level to help a human make decisions. So it's like a cyclical process.
Yeah.
So human is the one who trains, as well as humans are the one who decides.
So probably the way you are asking questions is a lot more important now rather than consuming that knowledge.
Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Finlatics podcast. I know it's been 7 months since the first episode, but thanks for all the love that you showed on the first episode. And going forward, we're pretty keen on being far more regular in our releases than before. So today I have somebody with me who's probably the sharpest finance brain that I know of, or perhaps the sharpest brain in any sort of markets that I know of. So this is Karan Sampat. We know each other from our MBA. We did our MBA together. And the reason I called Karan on this podcast is because I used to love his interactions in finance, even in class. And plus, to be very honest, he was the reason why I could pass both my financial management as well as corporate finance papers while we were studying together. The whole idea behind bringing him in was that today we are looking to discuss something which is of extreme relevance and which is something that appeals to a lot of people. So today we are looking to discuss financial markets, both equities and derivatives, commodity markets, specifically oil and gas. And as all of us have a view on oil and gas, as a country as a whole, everybody has a view on oil and gas given, how it touches our day-to-day lives. And third, we are looking to also discuss artificial intelligence and its impact on financial research, its impact on market research. And the role of AI, as all of us know, has been ever evolving, and generally it's being implemented across sectors. So if you look at any sector right now, it's being impacted by AI in some way or the other. However, banking and finance historically has been a sector with high levels of IT adoption. So if you look at even the balance sheets of a lot of IT companies, they have a fair amount of exposure towards banking and finance. So naturally, artificial intelligence in finance as a domain has been of historical implementation and historical relevance. And as we go ahead, its implementation is going to even increase more. So that's the reason we thought we'll get someone who's an expert on all these topics to discuss them all together. And as I can vouch for Karan on this is because, I remember a lot of finance classes from our MBA together. And it was essentially a lot of times just a batting and bowling match between the professor and Karan, where Karan used to throw questions after questions to the professor. And he often challenged a lot of teaching pedagogy of the professor on finance subjects because he was a CFA before he did his MBA. So before we did our MBA, Karan had a CFA already in place. So he was kind of like a finance wizard in our class, and often he used to have deep discussions with the finance professor, of which only probably him and the professor understood that deeply. And a lot of our professors used to have a very weak wicket in terms of defending themselves in front of Karan when Karan came up with his finance knowledge concepts as well as his experiential knowledge that he has gained with his experience in the domain over time. So I welcome Karan for this podcast. So Karan, we would like to ask you the first question, which a lot of our viewers might be thinking, and it's also something that was intriguing for us. So first, we just want to know that how did you get into finance? Why finance, and why are you what made you the wizard of markets of our class at least? So how was that journey? Where did it all start?
Yeah. So firstly, thank you, Nishant, for having me here. So my journey into finance, rolls back to a lot of years back, and it's actually something to do with my father. So my father is into investing and stocks and everything, since a lot of years. So I used to hear all these terminologies of finance and everything since I was 8 or 10 years old, when I started understanding a bit. So that was the starting point. I used to hear a lot of conversations which my father used to have with his own clients and his friends and everyone. So that was a real starting point for me, that generated a lot of curiosity in me. And I used to read a lot of Bhav copy, it was available then, so my father used to get it home every day, and I used to read the I used to just initially start uh, looking at the price movements, and I was very infatuated about few stocks, something like Infosys, which was actually trading in five digits then, and I was wondering what is this. And then gradually when I started showing more interest, then my father actually told me it's not the stock price, but it also depends on a lot of other factors also. So that was my initial starting point into finance.
So, in a way, finance is something that's been in your blood all throughout.
Yes, definitely, you can say so.
And also a lot to do, whatever we do going ahead, a lot to do also comes from the upbringing fact. My father was in exports when I was young. So I did a master's in international business. There is always a link to what we pursue from where we come from, kind of a thing. So in early days when you learned finance under, I think your first teacher would probably be your father in terms of finance as a as a domain. So it is something that runs really deep in you. So often there is a thought process of a lot of people that because you knew so much about finance, and because obviously you had a head start given your father being in the domain. So, because you did a CFA going ahead. So, how did the CFA actually help you in terms of, decoding finance from a, from a study perspective? How did it give, because a lot of our viewers and a lot of students these days, they want to do CFA and they want to, get in, they feel CFA is a gateway to get into finance as a career. So, given the fact that you already had a head start, we want to know how did the CFA add value and why did you pursue the CFA? How did it add value to your overall profile and overall knowledge base? How did it help?
So actually it was my father only, again, he told me that this certification called CFA, and he's seen few of fund managers actually pursuing, but obviously those fund managers already had a CA or an MBA, and they were just pursuing to kind of enhance their knowledge into finance. So he actually introduced me first to this course, and then I think one of his friend's son already actually had cleared CFA, and so he got me his books, and I just casually started reading the books and everything. And my sister was also pursuing her chartered accountant then, and I used to compare the two books and the CFA books were very interesting, primarily because of my affinity more towards finance as compared to accounts. So chartered accountant has finance as a subject, but CFA is totally finance. It kind of touches the length and breadth of finance, and there are a lot of things in CFA curriculum which you would never even hear about, it doesn't even exist in Indian markets. You have MBA securities and ABA securities, which are mortgage-backed securities, asset-backed securities, which are a very big market in say country like US, but they're almost non-existent in compared to in a country like India. I mean there are these portfolios which actually get traded, and the other thing is from what I had heard then and is still valid right now, is that CFA curriculum is actually very dynamic, kind of changes each and every year. They actually put in a lot of effort to deliver the right amount of content which is actually relevant for the end users, which is very current. So I think that's one thing where CFA scores over a lot of other courses. So in that sense, I feel CFA is very relevant. And now again, coming back to your question as to how it actually helps to get a job into the investment decision making or something. So that is, I think, something which is, it kind of depends upon individual, what opportunities you have or something. Because this is where honestly, I feel from what I've seen and what I've observed is this is where something like an MBA would score over CFA in terms of job opportunities. But then obviously MBA is very different as compared to CFA, because I think we've studied we MBA, we're studying it currently, and we know the amount of subjects related to finance as compared to a CFA. CFA is core finance, and in MBA there are a lot of other subjects you would run you would know a lot of other things also within a function of a company, there are various departments.
Yeah, I mean the Hawkeye view of things.
Yeah, the Hawkeye view of things. So there's a difference. And plus, the biggest difference would be the campus placement what an MBA offers. With CFA is just a certification, and there is our institute, they actually do try I see few job openings on the portal, but I personally never tried that, so I cannot comment on that. But yeah, I mean, it's something which I feel at least when I cleared my CFA was non-existent, but I think gradually they are doing something about it. So I mean, in that aspect, I feel getting that core job. But again, within the investment function, one needs to do research if they actually want to get into their dream jobs as to what kind of people are actually there and what are their qualifications. So many times people just feel if they want to do MBA, and they'll just get into that. That's not actually the right path. So it's more you have to see which institutes these actually there, the target job companies and the target job, whatever they are actually want to pursue. So where does these companies actually come from, and they actually need to target these kind of colleges to actually get
into the correct kind of jobs.
So that research needs to be done.
Yeah. So honestly, if I can just break down your answer, what you just crystallize it. So CFA is something which help you get into the depth of finance as a domain.
Yes.
And MBA, which you did after CFA, the whole idea is that it gives you a Hawkeye view of the business function as a whole, on how a business functions as a whole. So the CFA, from what I can understand, I am not a CFA, but from what I can understand of the CFA is that currently, because it's the US CFA, so I think because American markets are far more mature than Indian markets, so a lot of content which is covered on the CFA is something that is yet to happen in the Indian markets.
Yes.
Like you spoke about mortgage-backed securities, and so it's yet to come into the Indian markets. And so as we go ahead, and as more sophisticated financial instruments come into the Indian markets, from a core domain perspective, the leverage of CFA is kind of bound to increase in that sense. The value of CFA can appreciate over time as we go ahead and as Indian markets get more mature in a way. While if we look at the MBA, it is something that gives you a vision to the overall business function, because we've experienced, it's not finance specific. But to get into core finance through an only MBA route, the institute matters a lot.
Yes.
Somewhere I also feel, because I did my master's from Warwick, what you pointed out about placements and CFA placements versus MBA placements, what I also feel is that if I just break down the placement process on how India works versus say the UK or the US, India works on the whole idea of campus placements, companies come to campus to hire. But as you know, developed countries, a lot of the education system over there, it doesn't work core on campus placements. There are career fairs, which I was at Warwick for my masters, and then there were career fairs about companies that came on campus, they showcased their opportunity, but at the end of the day, the student had to apply on the company portal for the opportunity. So it's more or less an outreach activity that a student does on the company portal. So just because I went to Warwick, that doesn't mean I can get, say, a placement in a particular company. But because it is essentially that even a student from a university that's not Warwick, where perhaps the career fair of that company was not conducted, even he can apply for the same job, because it's an online application for everyone. While in India, because some companies go to certain campuses and that's how the whole system works. So essentially the institute leverage on, the placement factor and where you're coming from. In an MBA, that matters a lot. So for an MBA finance wanting to get into a particular domain role, so he has to be very careful while he picks the institute of his choice. And if a student is, say, looking to go in for an MBA finance and wants to get into a particular domain, he has to be very specific in the institute of his choice, whether companies from that domain of finance come into that institute or no. So that's what, I could probably get a brief, because I when you were talking about the difference in placement systems, I could relate it that when I thought of it in the UK, how placements work, and because CFA is the US CFA that you did, it's from the CFA Institute. So that's why maybe placements are they're more accustomed to that system vis-a-vis this system. Hence the gap may.
I don't think
exist.
we actually have a formal placement system in with the CFA Institute. It's just that there are these local bodies, they kind of try, because now we have a.
They have to do that in India, because that's how the market essentially is operating as well.
Yeah, but apparently, from what I've seen, there are a lot of people who actually pursue CFA more as an add-on, and they just want to enhance their knowledge in finance further. So they actually try to comprehend with, say, a CA or an MBA or something. It's more like a dual degree.
Okay, it's more like a dual degree.
Yeah, as of now, it is more like a dual degree. But then probably I was I did exactly the opposite. I cleared my CFA, and then probably I got into research and everything. So maybe I've done it exactly the opposite of what general trend is. But then probably this is where I am, and it just depends upon what an individual can do, and probably where he or she actually wants to go, what path they want to take. So basically I think more trendier path is doing your MBA or CA and then pursuing CFA
in current day.
Yeah.
You do your MBA and then you do your CFA, because MBA finance can get to a level, but to get into more core finance, you do a CFA.
Yes, exactly.
So on the side.
Yeah, and exactly, it even depends, so CFA will actually give you, more opportunity to work, with global clients, what I've been doing. But I don't know, if you want to work with, say, local brokerages, which we have in India, and they cover the local markets. So there, maybe a CFA would not be, I would say, not relevant, because it's finance. So obviously be relevant, but then people would actually place a bit more emphasis on, say, CA and MBA.
Yeah.
So there are these factors, which
the market understanding differs. For global companies, they know the CFA, but for a lot of local Indian brokerages, especially small and mid-sized brokerages, they might value a CA far more.
So because these are regional factors. So in my experience, what I've seen is even if you've actually done your MBA from a very elite Indian institute, okay, but then you have a CFA, which has happened with me. It's just that people recognize CFA more as compared to even our elite India. But these I'm talking about, the global clients, because they're not used to the Indian education system.
Yeah, they don't know the names.
They don't know the credentials of the institute or something. So there's always pros and cons.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that, when you shifted from AlphaSense, when you unlocked the value, shifted to AlphaSense from Barclays, and you unlocked the value of the MBA, there was an Indian panelist from IIT Bombay who recognized our institute and told somebody who was not from India that this institute is, for an MBA, is like the Ivy League of India. And that helped you to unlock value. But essentially for somebody outside India, the CFA was something that was far more.
Yeah, this is what, so probably, so these are the factors which kind of are at play. So, it depends, there are a lot of things going around. So you need a bit of luck, that somebody would be able to recognize. Or maybe somebody is actually doing research.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, who's hiring?
The hiring person is actually doing research. So it depends.
It depends.
Yeah.
So for global value, CFA is something which is far easier to kind of unlock in that.
Yes.
So Karan, after CFA, like what was the first job that you got into? Like honestly, our team has done some research, so we know that it was into equity research. And why I ask this specifically about your experience in equity research is because a lot of people who are students with us, or a lot of people who have any sort of interest in Finlatics as a company, they are ones who want to get into equity research at some point of time, or or are ones who want to get into equity research as part of managing their savings, or want to get into equity research as a job function. So can you tell us or enlighten all of us on what it was like to work in equity research, how it's like working there, and so what's your experience been in equity research as a domain?
So I'll just start post CFA. I actually wanted to get into equity research, and I found myself an internship. You can look up into my LinkedIn profile and you'll figure it out. But even initial few months were not easy for me to actually get the kind of role which I actually wanted. So I had a very honest conversation with my head of department, and I asked him, listen, this is what I need to do, this is why I've signed up here, and what are the prerequisites you're looking at to actually involve me in that kind of a role. Okay. And my boss simply told me, you need to develop some kind of understanding. You pick up anything, you write about it, and you come back to me. So I was just speaking to my immediate manager, and he said this was way back early 2014, and he said shale oil is kind of booming, you might as well want to write something about it. And that was actually the first trigger into oil and gas. So I actually happened to do a little bit of research, and I kind of managed to pull it off, and I wrote a few pages on shale oil and how is it going to impact the oil market, and why is it so big, and who are the key players in terms of countries, and how is it different, and what would it mean in terms of energy security for USA and all these kind of things. And I presented it to my boss, and he liked it, so we kind of published it on our website. So that was my first foray into research. So this is how actually I got into my first proper equity research role. So that is actually the starting point.
So interesting. This was basically, if I just break it down, you were really frank with your boss, and then you took this idea about writing on shale, which was something of a big talked about topic at that point of time. And you got into it because you took that, you were frank with what you wanted with your boss, and then you took a trendy topic and you took a conversation that you thought was insightful, and you wrote on it, and that helped you get into research.
So that helped him, my boss kind of pitched me
as a
research analyst into oil and gas, and this is how I actually got my first job into oil and gas. So I'll tell you, when I actually joined this team as equity research, so financial modeling is something at the core of it. And so you need to build a lot of financial models, that is a prerequisite. And then obviously subsequently you also need to develop a penchant for writing. So whatever models you do, that is one bit of the story. But if you actually want to become a proper hardcore research analyst, you should also build up skills to actually whatever you're modeling, that needs to come out and in a very crisp and very clear way. So you also need to have good writing skills.
Oh, that's interesting. So because a lot of people, what is the general idea is that writing skills is something which is not the best skill set that a finance guy has. But like you say, if you want to get into equity research as a role in depth, you need to develop writing skills, because that's where the analysis comes in.
So you have to have there's one way of communicating with your clients. So you have these reports which people write. So you need to convey the message in a very crisp and a clear way, because we know an attention span of an individual is not more than 1 or 2 minutes. So you have to convey your message, whatever you want to convey about that particular stock, whatever is in your coverage, and you have to kind of build up a story which is very clear and concise. So that is why the writing part is very important.
That's actually very interesting. We have a program that's on financial markets, and all of our programs actually, there are dedicated projects that we give which are essentially on writing. and we have a note there below. So though we have a checker for plagiarized content, but we have a note below that if you're plagiarizing content just to submit your report, this is an optional project that you're doing with us, so essentially just cheating yourself. So if you're here to build any skill set generally, there's no point cheating yourself, because going in the long run you won't be able to do that in front of a client that you're presenting a research report to, or any sort of real life solution that you're going in. Like fine, obviously we have softwares to check for plagiarism, but the whole idea is that as a student, why would you want to plagiarize something that could probably plagiarize your career going ahead? So essentially what you speak about writing is like very, very like, something that as a company we lay a lot of emphasis on as well when we come up with any program, that that there should be a skill set that would come up that you have to develop, which is to writing and like communicating your ideas essentially. So just going further in research, so like, do you feel that like we have any two types of research, like like if I may just split research into, so one, you spoke about oil and gas, which was basically a sectoral research that you did in a way, which helped you get into equity research, and the other is stock specific research that happens, which when you spoke about writing research reports on certain stocks and stuff like that. So how do you see, like, how should one individual, or how should a student, or how should any viewer of this podcast who wants to get into equity research from a sectoral report perspective as well as a company specific report writing perspective, so while you look at a sector and while you look at a company, or while you publish research reports on that, how does your approach change? That's one. And the other idea is, as a reader, how should one's approach be different towards a sector or a company, like, but more so from a writing perspective, like how does your approach vary on a sectoral report as well as a company specific report?
So basically, just as a starting point, I feel the sector and the company coverage would actually go hand in hand. So basically, you track a sector, and then within that sector you will be given coverage of certain companies. So basically, like when you track a sector, so you'll probably you'll be given certain companies, or you're going to be initiating reports on those companies, and you would probably comment on how are these companies actually going to perform based on your sector analysis or something, or why have you chosen this sector. So for example, I can give you the shale oil. Okay, when I write about shale oil, the most logical follow-up question would be, okay, which are the E&P companies which actually are foraying into shale oil, which companies have the capabilities, and then probably you cover the stocks and probably initiate the coverage, or probably there is existing coverage and you want to just build on that or something like that. So this is what kind of happens into equity research. So it's not there are always,
it's a process, you mean?
Yeah, there's a process. So there are always various steps involved. You can directly be given some certain coverage of the stocks, or maybe you can do. So there are industry reports also, and company specific reports also, but they're all just part of the same thing. There's nothing kind of you will only be doing a sector report, or you'll be only doing a stock specific. Both of things go hand in hand.
So as an analyst, if suppose you're given certain sectors to track, you track the sectors as well as the companies. It's not like in the job profile SIA you have to only track companies or only track sectors. It's basically sectors then companies.
Yeah, so basically there's a sector.
It's a process.
If it's a vast sector, there'll be multiple analysts tracking.
Obviously.
With slightly different coverage or something, or there'll be multiple analysts tracking the same sector. There'll be a senior analyst and a junior analyst supporting. So, but general theme would be you'll be tracking a sector, and then within that sector will be actually covering
the companies in the sector. Actually, just a point, we have one of our major programs is the financial markets program, which a lot of people have done standalone. They also do it as part of a financial analyst program, and that for the longest period this was like our research approach. So we asked most students to pick a sector, and then we gave follow-ups on how first they start by authoring a sector specific report, and then they pick companies of their choice on which they write company specific report, which was kind of devised from this whole idea that sectorial research and company specific research go hand in hand. We start from the sector and then you cover a company, which also is something how practically jobs work. So essentially, if you're an analyst on a particular sector, you start on the sector. The next follow-up question from a client is which companies to kind of get into in this sector if he finds the sectoral coverage interesting. So essentially, like you said, both go hand in hand. But like going ahead in your career, so from equity research, you you went into something which was very much an industry. You went into oil and gas.
Yeah.
You worked for one of the world's biggest BFSI players, which was Barclays, in oil and gas, where you were tracking oil. So how was the transition like? From like we know that it was something that was in the making, because if I think of it, the first report that you wrote was on shale, and then you started tracking oil full time. So looking at commodity markets now going ahead, and earlier you were looking at financial markets, equity markets, and now you were looking at commodity markets at Barclays. So how did the approach change? Like as a core idea, as a layman, how do commodity markets function, and how are they different from equity markets? Is something that is always something that intrigues all of us.
Yeah, so commodity markets are altogether different as compared to equity markets. So basically, you have models there, but in equity market, you have financial models, which probably there are a lot of providers and something like that. But when you actually track a commodity, country level models, so there are various challenges to actually there are various things to look into, and it's like a macro picture. And if you're tracking equity, is more like a micro picture, when there are individual companies, where to look at for the information. But with commodity, even sky is not the limit in terms of data and everything. There's just always something somewhere, and a lot of factors influencing commodity markets. So basically there's demand, there's supply, and there is an inventory thing to look at, a lot of geopolitical risk. Then there are always country level advantages and disadvantages, and there's always the execution risk to what each of the players in the industry are talking about. And over and above, there's always the other midstream and downstream infrastructure, and there's a lot of supply chain logistics involved. And they all kind of play hand in hand, so it's just that you have to track a lot of things there.
It's like a wealth of not easily available information.
Yeah, you can say for a few things there is a combination of available information, but you also need to understand where to look at. And there are certain governments which should actually provide you a few of the information, in a few of the countries, if you're tracking say US, then probably there's a lot of information available. But then if you want to track say something like Russia or China, there's just a handful of listed companies which would actually provide you that information. But then there are other paid databases which would give you some guesstimate of the information. But then again there are a lot of moving factors which kind of get into play, and there's just always someone somewhere who knows much more than what you do because they have this leverage of being at the position they are, and then being at the right place at the right time. So it's always challenging. With equity, where you will find this information and who are the correct sources. But when you are tracking commodity, I've tracked oil and gas, I've always found it very difficult to actually kind of rely on for this particular situation which is the best source. So probably the length and breadth and the scope of commodity research is far wide as compared to an equity research. This is just in my opinion, because I've tracked both of the things, and this is my honest assessment about the commodity research thing.
Yeah, honest. So because you've told us that a lot of things impact commodity markets, and not only one thing, there are various factors impacting them, and also because the world is in various time zones. So tracking oil and gas, did it give you sleepless nights a lot of times, because anything can happen at any point of
I
time.
mean,
especially geopolitical risk can occur at 2 a.m. in the night also.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know, any pipeline could have bombed and suddenly, we are in a different world, and then suddenly, after a couple of days, the entire thing is subsidized also, and you'd be literally, oh, if this is what it is, and suddenly, there's a risk premium into play, and it kind of shuts up, and then you have further information, hey, it's not, as we kind of envision, and it's just not, geopolitical risk. There are other systemic risk also, very recently, probably last year this time, the Canada wildfire, so.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so there was these wildfires in Canada which were very close to the oil fields. So there are these natural disasters also, maybe hurricane season, wherein a lot of exploration activities kind of is halted, but you technically do not forecast for these things. They just happen, and so there's a short-term disruption, and then probably this is where price elasticity comes into play.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah, okay. So because when the market is in a short-term imbalance, the risk premium kind of shoots up in the oil prices, and then this is where even when there's a very short-term mismatch, something which is kind of not fairly ascertained by the market, then probably this is when I feel it's kind of very difficult to put in a number on the risk premium, and this is where we see the volatility, why crude just spikes up suddenly for 15 days on an event, and then suddenly that event becomes no show, as the market actually gets more information on it. So the flow of information is very important.
And the flow of information is also not even. It's it comes together. It's very difficult to access correct information.
Yeah, definitely.
There is an information asymmetry, I believe, in commodities
overall there is, but in commodity, I feel it's slightly more.
It's slightly more, because there are some people who are closer to the source of information than others.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is that you have to be really aware about what's happening. Maybe reading the newspaper also has some very basic question, but reading the newspaper, does it help in commodities? A lot, because understanding what is happening in the nook and corner of the world is something. Did it help you remain updated with?
No, not really. I'll be very honest with you. Newspapers, many
it's
times,
very basic.
It was a very laughable thing, what they used to quote, but it's fine, because their purpose is kind of different. Their audience is different, and when you actually are tracking commodity, and you are actually doing research, so your audience are very sophisticated bunch of people who wouldn't get into hearsay. You need to back your research with proper data.
So data is the king.
Yeah, so data is the king, yeah.
Data is, like Mukesh Ambani said, data is the new oil.
Yeah.
But it's very relevant for oil also.
Yeah, obviously, data is very relevant for, I would say, decision making on anything. So, yeah, you need to back your research with, a very, very strong data and a very, strong interpretation of that data. So, I don't know, news, whatever we read in newspapers or a few magazines, I don't feel I can actually use much of that information. Maybe I can use some numbers what they are quoting, and I can try and validate it, and I can use it, but I can't actually go on and kind of just share that news link with my client and say, hey, this is, because my job is slightly different there. So because they bank on me for doing very crisp and concise research backed by data. So
understood.
Whatever I read in newspaper is more like a hearsay, like a rumor kind of a thing, which may or may not be backed by data, and I really don't know what data are they looking at when they are writing these things. So maybe they have to actually convince me on that part for me to think that that might be more relevant. But yeah, then there are other what do you call databases like Bloomberg or something where they have proper oil and gas analyst as a journalist, and probably but that is not available to the wider audience. When I say newspapers, it's available to the wider audience, and maybe there's an asymmetry in information there, and probably not that detailed analysis, you can say, backed by a good amount of data.
That's perfect. That's a very frank answer on how things work. You can't go to a client and say, hey, this newspaper quoted this.
You can't do that, right? I mean, he said like, even I can read that. But you tell me if it is probable or no.
So moving ahead, like from Barclays Oil and Gas, you got to this company called AlphaSense, which is essentially an artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And artificial intelligence to get market intelligence, if I'm not wrong. So can you tell us more about AlphaSense, what it does, and why this leap now into artificial intelligence for you personally?
So like I like trying things, like you've seen like my career from like trading to equity research to commodity research, and now being part of this product company which is actually hands down on like use of AI to create a relevant content for people in finance. Okay, so what AlphaSense is actually doing is like it's leveraging on its capabilities into AI to provide a very crisp and concise and actionable insight for the clients. And this is what I actually love, because what AlphaSense is trying to do is something like there are not many people like would have achieved in the market, at least from what I know. Like there's always something somewhere happening, and somebody might just come up tomorrow and might shock us. So we really don't know like what is actually going around like in the entire market. But still like I feel what AlphaSense is actually going to do is it's saving a lot of time of user. So many times like a lot of people spend a lot of amount in like collating data and like just researching the data and aggregating or collating the data. What AlphaSense actually does is like it kind of saves you on that time. So it kind of gives you that kind of insightful information for you to actually act on. So maybe like what people can actually do with AI is like they can save a lot of time in search and aggregation, and they can spend a lot of time, the saved time on actually researching the data and probably like analyzing the data,
making sense of the data.
Yeah, making sense of the data, because obviously like data doesn't come easily, because you have to like skim through a lot of documents. And this is where like use of AI is really helpful. So it actually helps you in like searching, like skimming through a lot of documents and giving you a very insightful and precise information what you're looking at. So you save your time on that, and probably you spend more time on actually analyzing that data.
So if the whole idea is that AlphaSense, can you give us a used case like of any one product that you're currently running at AlphaSense, which essentially like on any company or anything, or like because it's a database and you have a library of companies, you almost cover all companies. So can you give us any use case on say a company X? So if I go on the AlphaSense platform, so if I'm not wrong, it scans through its documents, its annual reports, its essentially its management commentary, and then it uses artificial intelligence to make sense of that data to a particular degree, which is actionable for a human to come in and then make decisions on. Am I fair in my understanding of what the company does?
So I will just like I just few minutes back I spoke about Canada wildfire, okay, at oil sands, okay. So you can actually leverage AlphaSense platform, like by just researching on like Canada wildfire. You put in the relevant keywords there, and like it will give you a list of companies. You just aggregate in a single window, like what is the management talking about, like the impact of Canada wildfire on their production.
Oh, okay.
So like you can easily aggregate
all.
So you don't need to physically go and like scroll to hundreds of companies. It just give you that data in a very single window and within seconds. So you save a lot of time.
Yeah, and now you can use that time to make better decisions.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great actually. I mean, like if I can think of, there are so many events where I would want to know the sentiment of companies on that event, and I can just do that through the AlphaSense platform.
Yeah, so that is just a very like
one of
several cases. This is just for our understanding as to like how you can leverage AI, and how is like the company where I'm working for like is using AI to like get you that insights, and it kind of saves a lot of time. Obviously like we do much beyond that, but then probably like I would keep myself restricted to something like which is kind of
a basic understanding.
So
that's Perfect. In fact, it's very interesting because it's also a very new domain. Like everybody is speaking about AI right now, and when we started this podcast, my whole idea was that a lot of people are speaking about AI. Everyone's interested in markets. BFSI is something that's always exposed most to technology. So this is something that could really change the game of research in the very long run, because the time that a research analyst spends in order to come up with a report, that could be drastically saved by using the AlphaSense platform. So I mean, that is something which is very, very insightful for clients also using the platform, and for analysts who are using the platform. So if I look at it from one more angle, there's a very big debate on how artificial intelligence and human intelligence, how would they work together. And now you are somebody who works in that domain. Like AlphaSense as a company is combining human intelligence to build better artificial intelligence enabled products. So it's using, it's kind of operating in that domain of research. So how do you see the human element and the human mind working in intersection with AI going ahead?
So I think whatever large language learning models like ChatGPT, or there are various other models, what they are apparently I just read in an article which was actually written by one of our assistant professors at SPJMR, and what that person our assistant professor quoted was that a lot of these large language models are very generic in nature, because kind of they're not sector specific or a particular domain specific, what I can say. So wherein human intelligence comes into play is to understand the perspective, to train these models. These models are generic. So wherein why do you need to build in human intelligence is because they need to understand the natural language, because when you say a particular theme, a particular sentence or something, it could mean very differently, for two different purposes.
Okay. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So that knowledge a model needs to have, so which a generic model wouldn't have. So this is where it's very important for a model to understand. This is where I feel domain specific knowledge would need to be imbibed in a large language learning model.
That's interesting. Actually, more so also in a lot of market intelligence and market research, because often when we look at management commentary and when we do management commentary and analysis, understanding the sentiment of the management is something which only humans can understand. So they have to essentially train AI models in a way that the real sentiment comes out.
Yes.
In order to do good research or understand, or basically to apply AI better. So interesting as a whole platform, what you've experienced also at AlphaSense is somewhat in that domain. You train AI to get better data out to a particular level to help a human make decisions. So it's like a cyclical process.
Yeah.
So human is the one who trains, as well as humans are the one who decides. So artificial intelligence, so to say, would only be like a highway, which eventually often a lot of industries would come on, like how internet is a highway. Often a lot of industries over time have come to the internet, who are not even internet companies to begin with, but they are using the internet in some form or the other. And similarly, artificial intelligence going ahead could be another highway, which a lot of companies and sectors come on to use it in terms of better decision making, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of so I think one transition what I feel what an AI can drive is if you look at previously the amount of knowledge which a person actually consumed through its experience gained far more precedence. But with AI, I think there's knowledge everywhere, and it's just I feel going forward how you actually are going to use these models, it's a real skill. How are you going to get your answers, because the answers everywhere now, they are actually collating. Initially Google would actually come and probably just highlight where is this information present, but ChatGPT would actually summarize that information for you, probably read it out what are the use cases and everything and where it can be used. So probably like the way you are asking question is a lot more important now rather than consuming that knowledge. So this is what I feel like is kind of a real breakthrough thing. So it depends upon, it's actually making humans more smarter. Like I feel the knowledge gap between two people can actually be reduced like through these kind of language learning models.
Yeah, in fact, that's very insightful to think of. Yeah, it's making humans smarter. It's helping humans either ask the right questions also.
Yeah. So if you actually ask the right question, like somebody can actually like try it on ChatGPT, like or something like when you're asking questions in a slightly different way, you look at like what kind of answers are you getting, and you just do this what they call like prompt engineering. You just keep like improving your prompt and see like So that is also a skill I feel like currently, like how you use AI. I mean the kind of questions you even ask the model, and like how you kind of ask the same question differently, and see, you just look at yourself like what kind of output you're getting, and you probably get more insights as to like what I'm actually talking.
Yeah, in fact, that's interesting. It could be an experiment that even which all of us can do in our free times also, to ask the same thing differently and get different answers. So you understand what your language actually means for the other person also, or for the other computer also, who is now as intelligent as a person or even more intelligent in some sense. Lastly, like like as a 20-year-old who is looking to begin his career in finance, with all the evolving changes and given your experience, and now because AI is like deeply impacting careers, so what particular skill set do you think he should develop or should have, or she should develop or should have, to make it in finance, like with the ever evolving face of AI? Like what skill set do you think he or she should have, and like what are the essential skill sets that you would give advice to him or her on, that if to commence your career in finance, how would you like advise a 20-year-old?
I think building on analytical skills is very relevant, because a lot of times like a lot of jobs which are in market or which were previously also involved like your basic, the starting job would be like search and aggregation of data and like analyzing. But from what I see, like that's search and aggregation time is actually like is going to come down drastically, and people are going to spend more time in like analyzing data. So I feel like a person needs to develop that analytical skills. Like how do you actually like read the data? Then again, like it depends upon your own ability, or you can develop an ability to ask relevant kind of questions and then probably leverage the model from the model itself, like and you can actually like deepen your understanding.
Yeah. How do you do it is up to you, but the idea is to make sense. So develop this rather than challenging the idea of AI. It's more about embracing the idea of AI and working accordingly.
It's like what is the optimum solution? I mean like so probably like I would just kind of put in an analogy here. So probably like if I were to like want to go somewhere like from my home, then I know like there are like various options, but which is the optimal option?
Yeah.
And it also depends upon various factors like time, day, like peak hour, non-peak hour. This is the understanding, frankly. Why do we have this understanding? Because we've experienced this over a period of time. Now obviously like now just think about a person who's not experienced this, and just like but the language learning model actually knows about it. So now we have to like ask right type of questions, like what is a non-peak hour, what is not a non-peak hour. You've not experienced this, but you want to know, so you have to ask that kind of question to the model to actually gain that understanding. This understanding was missing, like you couldn't ask anyone, but now to the model you can actually ask, go, and these kind of questions what I'm trying to highlight, like this is what actually will drive like which would actually optimize your own performance, and this is kind of analysis which you can do, like keeping like using this large language learning model as an aid to actually fine-tune our understanding.
Yeah, that's perfect. So basically it's about building up more on analytical skills.
Yeah.
And how you do it is up to you, but the whole idea is, if you're starting out in finance, it's about building up more analytical skills as you go ahead. So through AI is one route to build it up, like by asking the correct questions. And earlier, like if I just consolidate it, earlier to get knowledge, you had to ask questions to the correct person.
Yeah.
Now there is a model, or there is availability of a lot of language learning models and a lot of AI platforms which democratize the whole idea of learning and information.
Yeah.
So building up and learning from them is something that seems extremely relevant for to build anyone's analytical skills in the domain. Thanks, Karan. Thanks for taking the time out and coming in for the podcast and enlightening everyone with your experience and all your knowledge. I'm sure all of us over here have got a lot to learn from you. So just thank you for coming in and thank you for taking the time out.
Yeah, thank you, Nissan. The pleasure is always mine, and it's nice chatting with you on what are these relevant topics. And I hope, I've added my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. And this was the second episode of the Finlatics podcast. We shall be coming up with more episodes soon. Until then, you can just press the like, share, subscribe button and to get all the updates from Finlatics. Thank you. Thanks a lot.